It was supposed to be just another birthday. But for Joanna Blake, the day didn't feel like a celebration. She had turned 18 that morning. No balloons, no cake, no streamers, just a quiet room, a tight ponytail, and her usual routine. She stood in front of the mirror, earbuds in, stretching, bouncing slightly on the balls of her feet while her workout playlist played softly in the background. It was her ritual, something that kept her grounded, even when everything else in her life felt like it was slipping out of control. Once she was done, she slung her bag over her shoulder and headed out for school. But the walk there wasn't quiet for long. A patrol car trailed her slowly until the officer inside finally stepped out to speak with her. He didn't come with birthday wishes. He came with questions about her father. That's how it always was lately. Ever since the media exposed her father's identity as a drug trafficker, the looks never stopped, and neither did the whispers. The officer, Detective Mercer, she thought his name was, asked her if she knew where her dad was. Joanna didn't answer. She kept walking. At school, things weren't any better. The moment she walked into class, she felt it again. That hollow silence people save for someone they've already decided to hate. She walked past desks covered in graffiti, and when she reached hers, it was worse than usual. Slut. Junkie's daughter. Get out. The insults were scrawled all over her desk, thick with marker, carved into the wood like they were meant to be permanent. She swallowed hard but didn't flinch. Not anymore. She was used to this. But today would be the last straw. When she was called into the principal's office during the second period, she already had a feeling what it was about. Principal Thompson didn't even look her in the eye when he said it. Some of the parents, they're not comfortable with you being here anymore, Joanna. Given your father's record. She sat there, trying not to react. But it stung. They weren't just expelling her. They were blaming her for sins she didn't commit. She walked back to class in silence. When she returned, her desk wasn't just vandalized anymore. It was covered in trash. Empty wrappers, gum, paper balls, even a half-eaten sandwich. The message was clear. You don't belong here. That was it. Without thinking, Joanna flipped the desk. It crashed loudly to the floor, shocking everyone into silence. Then she lunged, throwing punches, screaming, lashing out at the people who'd made her life a living hell. Teachers rushed in. Someone pulled her away. She didn't care. Before she left, she crumpled her name badge in her fist and threw it at one of the teachers. She didn't even wait to be told to leave. Outside, the cool air hit her face like a slap. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from fury. She walked quickly through the streets until she reached her neighborhood, only to find that same police car parked right outside her house. Joanna saw red. She picked up a rock and hurled it at the windshield. The impact cracked the glass. The officer inside shouted, and in an instant, she was on a run. Down alleys, over fences, across back streets. She didn't stop until she reached the shoreline. The ocean stretched out in front of her, endless and calm. And for a while, she just sat there, letting the wind tangle her hair as memories of her father flooded in. To her, he had always just been dad. No drugs, no secrets, just the man who tied her shoes, made her pancakes, and walked her to school. But now everything was poisoned. Everything was broken. She didn't want to believe the man who loved her more than anyone could be a criminal. But the world kept telling her otherwise. As night fell, she finally made her way back home. The patrol car was still there. Same officer. Same questions. Same weight on her shoulders. But she walked past him without a word. Her face blank, her heart in pieces. Elsewhere, in a dim corner of the city, her father, Daniel Blake, stood in a phone booth, clutching the receiver. He hesitated, then dialed. The phone rang in their kitchen. Joanna saw the caller ID, ignored it, but then she picked up. Hey, sweetheart, how are you holding up? Daniel's voice was calm, gentle, like he didn't know the world had collapsed. She didn't hold back. She told him how tired she was. How miserable, how angry. She said it plainly. It's your fault. All of it. There was silence on the other end. Then he said the words she didn't expect. I'm going to fix this. I promise you, Joe. But it was too late. She didn't want promises. She didn't want hope. She told herself he was already dead to her. Back in his car, Daniel turned on a cell phone he hadn't used in months. One message was waiting, her message. Her words, angry and raw, spilled across the screen. He stared at it for a long time. Then he drove. He didn't hesitate when he reached their house. He got out, walked straight toward the police guard, and knocked him out cold. No second thoughts. Just urgency. Just desperation. Inside, Joanna stirred at the sound of the lock jiggling. She crept to the door, looked through the peephole, and froze. Her father was on the ground, bleeding. A tall man in a dark coat was walking away from the steps. She fumbled with the door, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Her father was still holding it shut from the other side. Even in his final moment, Daniel was protecting her. Joanna opened the door just seconds too late. Her father was lying still, his body crumpled just outside. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into his clothes, dark and unstoppable. She dropped to her knees, her hands trembling as they hovered above him, afraid to touch what felt too final. His eyes were open. His lips moved slightly, barely. And with the last of his breath, he looked at her and whispered something so soft, she had to lean in close to hear it. "I'm sorry, Joe. I'm sorry I made your life so hard." Then nothing. Joanna clutched his body and cried. Not a quiet, polite sob, but the kind of cry that rips out of your chest when you've lost the only person who ever made you feel like you mattered. Her father wasn't perfect, but he was hers. And now he is gone. The next day, the funeral home was quiet, heavy with stillness and the scent of incense. Joanna stood alone near her father's casket until the sound of slow, coordinated footsteps echoed through the hall. A group of men in black suits entered, their presence commanding and precise. They didn't look like family or friend from a church group. These were men who carried power in their silence. Leading them was a tall, composed man named Marcus Ginn, the most feared and respected crime boss in the city. But today, he wasn't here to intimidate anyone. He came to mourn. Daniel Blake hadn't just been Joanna's father. He had once been Marcus's closest friend. Joanna watched him approach the casket, say nothing, and bow his head. He stayed that way for a long time before finally turning to her. "I trusted your father with my life," he said simply, voice steady but distant. She stared at him, trying to find meaning in those words. "Who killed him?" she asked, her voice hoarse but sharp. "Do you know?" But Marcus didn't answer the question. He just repeated, "He was the most loyal man I ever knew." Before they left, Joanna was given a final moment to see her father's face. The room blurred as her tears welled up again, memories flashing behind her eyes. Laughter, car rides, birthday candles. She held his hand one last time before the casket was closed and wheeled away for cremation. The grief hadn't even settled before the injustice returned. Joanna walked into the police station alone. She wanted answers, something, anything, to help her understand what had happened. But the detective on duty didn't even pretend to care. "The case is closed," he said. "No witnesses, no leads." Joanna clenched her jaw, pulled a flash drive from her pocket, and slid it across the desk. "There's CCTV footage from the night it happened. I gave it to you." The officer barely glanced at it. "Your father was a wanted man, a drug dealer. What did you think was going to happen?" Those words hit her harder than she expected. As she turned to leave, her fists were balled, her heart beating fast with anger. Not just at the police, but at the system that kept allowing men like her father to disappear without justice. That evening, in a luxury high-rise tucked away behind a nightclub front, Marcus Ginn's men reported to him. Joanna Blake came by, one of them said. Marcus didn't ask why. He simply said, "Let her in." She entered through a hallway thick with heat and the smell of money. Literal stacks of cash being counted by men in latex gloves, others sealing bags of white powder and loading crates on unmarked vans. It was an empire of quiet criminality, and she walked through it like she didn't care. Inside Marcus's office, she placed the USB drive on his desk, the same footage the police ignored. "I need your help," she said. "Whoever killed my father, I want to find him, and I want to kill him myself." Marcus studied her. Then, without a word, he stood, opened a drawer, and handed her a knife. "Start with me," he said, holding her gaze. "You want revenge? Prove it." Joanna stared at the blade in her hand, then at him. Her grip tightened. But she couldn't do it. Not because she didn't want justice, but because this wasn't justice. She lowered the knife. "You're not ready," Marcus said flatly. "Get out." She returned home that night feeling lost again. Everything inside her ached, but she didn't cry. Not this time. She just stood in the dark, waiting for something, anything, to make sense. Then came a knock. A soft, deliberate tap on the door. She froze, her breath catching. Moving slowly, she peeked through the peephole. It was the same man from that night. Black coat, calm face, cold eyes. She stepped back, heart racing. Then she ducked under a blanket on the couch and stayed there, trembling, until she was sure he was gone. But something inside her changed after that. She stood up. She grabbed a golf club from the hallway. She ran outside into the night, searching for him. She wanted to face him. She wanted to fight. But by the time she reached the end of the street, he had disappeared, gone like a shadow. Still, she didn't stop. The next day, she printed out dozens of posters. The image from the CCTV footage, his blurry figure, was front and center. Underneath, a message, information reward, $5,000. She taped them to walls, light posts, shop windows. She wasn't waiting for justice anymore. She was hunting for it. Somewhere in the city, Marcus Jin saw one of those posters. He didn't say anything. Not long after, Joanna's phone rang. The voice on the other end was quiet and unfamiliar. "I know who you're looking for," the man said. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. She picked up a small penknife, slipped it into her jacket, and left to meet the caller. Joanna arrived at the meeting location, expecting to meet someone with information about her father's killer. But it turned out that the caller was just a street thug, part of a small gang, and they only wanted to steal her money. They attacked her and forced her into the trunk of a car. While locked inside, Joanna heard another car pulling up and stopping. She tried to push the trunk open while defending herself against the men outside. Unexpectedly, the one who had arrived was Marcus Jin. His men had already beaten up the thugs. Afterwards, Marcus told Joanna to stop looking for her father's killer and to move on with her life. Joanna refused. She said she felt responsible for what happened to her father, and she wasn't going to accept that the police had closed the case just like that. Marcus, seeing her determination, told her that if she really wanted revenge, she had to first learn how to kill. Then he brought her to a location near the sea and harbor, a place used by his organization as a training ground for fighters. He explained that all his people were trained there before being hired by him. He then instructed his men at the site to train Joanna. The men were surprised. This was the first time a woman had come to train as a fighter with them. The next day, Marcus's right-hand man, Thomas Kwan, voiced his disagreement with the decision to bring Joanna into the organization. But Marcus insisted. He said he would allow her to get revenge for her father. At the training site, Joanna was led into a room by a man named Dean Kong. He told her that, starting now, her job was to wash and clean the training ground. However, if they saw potential in her, she could be moved to another role. During her time there, some of the men treated her harshly. One of them went as far as physically attacking her, which led to a fight. Eventually, the other stepped in and broke it up. Joanna didn't want to waste any time. Every night, after everyone else was asleep, she returned to the training grounds. She practiced on her own, repeating the techniques she had seen the others perform. Kicks, strikes, grapples, over and over. Her body was bruised, but she kept going. One evening, Marcus Jin came to see her. He stood by the edge of the training area, watching her silently for a while before speaking. "You still want to survive?" he asked. Joanna didn't stop moving. "I'll do anything to get stronger," she said, keeping her eyes forward. Hearing that, Marcus stepped closer. He showed her basic survival techniques, how to react when pinned, where to strike when unarmed. He pointed out critical weak spots on the human body: neck, ribs, knees, throat. He trained her directly for several days, showing her how to control breathing under pressure, how to strike fast, and pull back before the opponent could counter. Most of the time, he simply observed from a distance while she trained with the others, but she noticed that he always watched. Time passed, and the day came when the fighters were tested to find the strongest among them. It was an elimination-style match. Everyone in the organization knew what it meant. The winner would be transferred to another site closer to Marcus's inner circle. The rules were clear: endure the opponent's attack until one person could no longer stand. In one of the final rounds, Dean Kong stepped into the ring against Joanna. At first, he stayed on his feet while landing several strong hits. But Joanna didn't fall. She struggled back to her feet again and again. Dean growled, "Just stay down." Joanna didn't reply. She lifted her fists and kept going. Eventually, she struck back hard. A well-placed hit knocked Dean off balance, and another dropped him completely. He didn't get up. Joanna was declared the winner. Dean remained unconscious for several minutes before being carried back to his room. Later, when he woke up, Dean found himself lying on his mattress, sore and dazed. One of his friends was laughing while watching a replay of the fight on a phone screen. "Did you see your face when she hit you?" the man said, grinning. Dean didn't say anything at first. Then he looked up and muttered, "She's going to pay for that." That night, he gathered a few people. Angry and humiliated, Dean suggested doing something to Joanna. Meanwhile, someone else had already slipped something in her drinking water, and she started to feel the effects. Her vision blurred, her balance unstable. One of Dean's friends, looking uneasy, spoke up. "This is going too far," he said. "We should stop." But Dean ignored him, along with another man. He walked toward Joanna's room. Joanna, half conscious but aware, realized something was wrong. When she heard the door, she braced herself. As they entered, she grabbed a nearby object and fought back. The commotion grew loud enough that Thomas Kwan, who had been nearby, heard it and came in. He pulled Dean and the others off her, then looked at Joanna. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded faintly. Thomas didn't waste time. He grabbed Dean by the collar and dragged him straight to Marcus Jin's office. Once inside, Thomas said firmly he tried to hurt her. Marcus didn't speak right away. He stared at Dean, then walked to a wall-mounted rack and picked up a thin, curved sword. He stood in front of Dean. "You've let me down," Marcus said. Dean fell to his knees. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to." Before he could finish, Marcus moved. The tip of the blade slashed across Dean's face, just deep enough to leave a scar, not to kill. Dean winced but didn't fight back. The punishment was clear. Back in her room, Joanna sat on the floor, carefully gathering the small box that held the ashes of her father. She didn't speak. She didn't move much. Soon after, Thomas arrived. He stood by the doorway. "You shouldn't have fought Dean," he said flatly. "You and your father, you don't belong in this world." Joanna looked up but didn't respond. "You should leave. This life isn't for you." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Later that evening, she was taken to a small tavern on the edge of the city. Inside, Marcus was waiting. "This place was your father's favorite," he said, sitting at the bar. Joanna stood still. Marcus placed a small envelope on the table. "From now on, you're no longer Joanna Blake," he said. "That girl was killed by Dean Kong." She opened the envelope and found new identity documents. The name read, Helen Grant. Marcus then placed a pistol on the table. "This was the weapon found the night your father died." Joanna looked at it silently. "He was killed by a police officer," Marcus said. "So that's where we'll start." He told her that she would be entering the police academy under her new identity. Her task was simple: find out who the killer was. Time passed. Helen trained harder than ever before. She learned how to handle weapons, handguns, knives, and batons. She learned how to blend in and observe. Eventually, she was tattooed with the mark of Marcus's organization on her chest, near her collarbone. She had officially joined the group. From that point on, Helen Grant could never go back. 3 years later, Helen Grant officially entered the police academy and completed her training. After that, she joined the crime investigation unit. On one particular day, she received an assignment to pursue a murder suspect who had been on the run for a long time. The latest tip had tracked the suspect to a nightclub. Before going in, Helen turned to her colleague and said, "Call for backup." "I'll go inside." She entered the club quietly. Inside, the suspect was making a drug deal with another man. Helen began searching the rooms, checking them one by one. In one of the rooms, she found a woman lying on the floor, barely conscious, her body trembling and her breathing irregular. An empty syringe lay beside her. Helen quickly knelt beside her and said, "Hey, stay with me. Can you hear me?" She stabilized the woman and called for medical help before moving forward. In another room, she saw a group of men in the middle of a drug transaction. Without hesitation, she entered and tried to apprehend them. A fight broke out almost immediately. One of the men lunged at her, but she managed to bring him down. Chairs crashed, bottles shattered, and chaos erupted inside the small space. A few minutes later, police sirens could be heard outside. Backup had arrived. When the officers entered the club, Helen was already handcuffing the suspect. But not everyone was pleased. A man stepped in, visibly angry. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His name was Peter Doyle, an officer from the narcotics division. He was in plain clothes and had been working undercover. "You just blew 6 months of planning," he snapped. "I didn't see anyone inside," Helen replied flatly. "I was inside," Peter said. "I was the plan." The two got into an argument about jurisdiction and procedures. The suspect had been Peter's target, and now the arrest might compromise ongoing investigations. Later, their superior called Helen into his office. After reviewing the situation, the captain allowed Peter to take the suspect into his custody. Peter looked at her one last time and said coldly, "I don't want to see you again." Elsewhere in the city, a gang fight had broken out. In the middle of the chaos, Marcus Jin walked calmly through the scene, unbothered by the violence. He was looking for someone, one of his own business associates who had betrayed the organization by secretly selling drugs to outside parties. Marcus found the man hiding behind a vehicle. "Please," the man said, raising his hands. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean to," but Marcus didn't give him a second chance. Without hesitation, he killed him on the spot. The next day, Helen was seen walking into the Bayfield police headquarters. She had made a decision. She wanted to move to the drug unit. Inside, she met the head of the narcotics division. His name was Captain Charles Grant. The moment she saw his face, something clicked. She remembered him. The same face. The same jacket. The one worn by the man she saw the night her father was killed. Captain Grant reviewed her application and her credentials. He looked impressed. "You've got a solid record," he said. "You'll start with us next week." Helen nodded. "Thank you, sir." That evening, she visited Marcus Jin at his office. "I got accepted into the narcotics unit," she said. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Good. That's the next step." She looked at him seriously. The man in charge, Captain Grant. He wore the same jacket as the man who killed my father. Marcus didn't react immediately. Then he spoke. "Your father once saved my life." He stood up and walked to a shelf behind his desk. There was a framed photo, an old one, slightly faded. "In a gang war, I was cornered. Everyone ran. But your father stayed. We got out of there together." He handed her something small, an old combat knife. "This was his," Marcus said. "Use it to kill the man who took his life." Helen took the knife in silence. At the Bayfield police headquarters, an interrogation was underway. A man named Charles Huang sat at the table, arms crossed, staring at the officers. They questioned him about his associates, asking for names, for his boss, for any useful leads. But Charles didn't answer directly. Instead, he shifted the topic. "There's someone else," he said. "Goes by the name Mango. He's making a new kind of drug. It looks like candy." The officers exchanged looks, but continued pressing for more details. Charles refused to name anyone else. Outside the interrogation room, Peter Doyle was walking through the corridor when he crossed paths with Helen Grant. She was standing near the door of the narcotics unit, preparing to enter for her first official day. She looked at him and said, "I'm with the drug unit now." Peter stopped. "You've got to be kidding me." Without another word, he turned and headed straight into Captain Charles Grant's office. "You put her on my team?" he asked, clearly frustrated. "I don't need a woman getting in the way. This isn't desk work." Captain Grant leaned back in his chair. "She might not last a month. Let's see how it goes." Peter exhaled slowly. "If she screws anything up, it's on you." The captain didn't respond. Meanwhile, Captain Grant had also been reviewing the case of a man found dead in his car. On paper, it looked like a suicide. No signs of forced entry, and the inside of the vehicle was filled with gas. But in truth, the man had been killed by Marcus Jin. He had used poison gas, staging the scene to appear as self-inflicted. Elsewhere, in a separate meeting, Thomas Kwan spoke privately with Marcus. I still don't trust her, Thomas said. She's new. We don't know where her loyalty really lies. Marcus replied, I trust the decision she made. She's useful, and she wants revenge. That's enough. He added, she's also a weapon. We can use that. Back at the precinct, Peter Doyle and his team began preparations for a new operation. Their target was Mango, the same man mentioned by Charles Huang. But instead of leading the mission himself, Peter turned to Helen. You're going in alone, he said. Helen raised an eyebrow. Seriously? You want to prove yourself? This is your chance. Helen entered the location without backup. She walked confidently and presented her police ID to the people inside. One man looked at her, then suddenly lunged. A fight broke out. While the fight was ongoing, Peter waited outside in position. The plan was simple. Send Helen in, and when Mango tried to escape, Peter would capture him outside. But Mango didn't run. After several minutes, Peter grew suspicious and moved inside. What he saw surprised him. The floor was littered with unconscious gang members. Tables overturned, chairs broken. The air was heavy and still. He stepped deeper into the room. At the back, Helen stood calmly, handcuffing Mango. Peter paused. You took him down? She nodded. It didn't go easy. Mango looked up. Where's your warrant? Peter chuckled. We'll get to that later. Together, they began searching the building. Every drawer, cabinet, and container was opened, but no drugs were found. Helen started observing the room more closely. Her eyes landed on the bartender, who seemed increasingly nervous. He fidgeted and avoided eye contact. She walked toward the bar. What's in those bottles? She asked. The bartender stammered. Just wine. Helen reached for one, twisted off the top, and looked inside. Hidden in the bottle neck was a sealed pouch of pills. That's what we're looking for, she said. Mango was arrested on the spot. Later that night, as they were walking toward their cars, Peter glanced at Helen. You weren't wearing a vest, he said. She didn't respond. I'm serious, he added. You go into a place like that without protection, someone's going to get you hurt. Then he turned and walked away. Back at the station, Mango was brought into the interrogation room. He was handcuffed to the table, facing two investigators. When questioned about the new drug, Mango began to talk. It's a new type, he said. Hasn't hit the market yet. Doesn't show up on tests. He went on to explain that the drug's creator was Dean Kong. 5 years earlier, Dean had been part of Marcus Jin's organization. He once tried to kill Joanna Blake during a fight, but was defeated. As punishment, Marcus marked Dean's face with the tip of his sword. After that, Dean left the organization and started producing a synthetic drug that couldn't be detected through standard testing. That made it highly attractive to buyers. Helen Grant, who learned this information quietly, informed Marcus Jin in secret. That night, Helen gained access to the police database. Sitting alone at a terminal, she began searching for evidence from her father's murder case. She pulled up video files and scanned through them. But the killer's face was hidden by a full-face helmet, making it difficult to identify anything. She dug deeper and found a record showing that Captain Charles Grant had been assigned to arrest a drug dealer on the day her father was killed. But she didn't know whether that dealer was her father or someone else. At the same time, Marcus Jin gave Thomas Kwan an order. Find out who's making this new drug, he said. I want a name. Later, Marcus and his assistant, Samuel Kong, met with members of a Yakuza group. The meeting was quiet and brief. They discussed distributing the new drug formula in exchange for partnership and profits. The next morning, all members of the narcotics unit gathered at Bayfield HQ. Captain Grant entered the briefing room and told them there would be an immediate mission. We're moving out today, he said. You'll be briefed on site. Before departure, every officer was required to hand over their phones. No communication. No recordings. No leaks. Then, at the location, the real target was announced. Captain Grant said, We're taking down Marcus Jin. He controls 90% of the drug trade in this country. Helen froze. She knew the name too well. She stayed quiet. Her breathing changed, but she didn't speak. The team moved toward their target, Marcus's hidden laboratory inside a ship docked at the harbor. The location had been carefully chosen and heavily planned to eliminate escape. Captain Grant stayed behind, monitoring the operation via a live camera feed sent from Peter Doyle's equipment. He gave orders from a control room as he watched the situation unfold. Helen saw Marcus through one of the corridors on the ship. She wanted to warn him, but she couldn't make a move. Peter was always watching her. Then, an attacker came out of nowhere and fought Peter, damaging his camera equipment. Peter managed to defeat the attacker, but his live feed was cut off. Now aware of Marcus's exact location, Peter moved to the lab floor and confronted him directly. "Don't move," he shouted. "You're under arrest." But before anything else could happen, the lights went out. The ship lost power. Moments later, a fire broke out. The mission collapsed. By the time the fire was contained, it was too late. The lab was destroyed. The evidence had burned. The footage was lost. The camera was gone, and the confrontation with Marcus Jin hadn't been recorded. While chaos unfolded around her, Helen suddenly screamed. She had found a gun lying near the scene. She picked it up, holding it out. "This is it," she said. It was the same weapon used in her father's murder. But in truth, it wasn't just a coincidence. The gun had belonged to her father's killer. Helen had kept it hidden all this time. Now, she was showing it, intentionally, to see how Captain Grant would react. Back at his headquarters, Marcus Jin was furious. He paced the floor, eyes narrowed, voice sharp. "No one told me anything," he said. Thomas Kwan stood nearby. "Why didn't Helen tell us?" he asked. Marcus didn't answer. He clenched his jaw and walked out of the room. Elsewhere, Helen Grant kept trying to call Marcus using a secret number. Her phone buzzed several times as she tried again and again. Marcus saw the caller ID. He didn't answer. He knew it was her. At the Bayfield Police Headquarters, the officers began interrogating the suspects who had been arrested during the operation on the ship. One by one, the detainees were brought into the interview room, but none of them were willing to speak. Every time they were asked questions about Marcus Jin or the lab, they stayed silent. "We can't say anything," one of them finally muttered. "We'll be killed." Captain Charles Grant grew more suspicious, especially about the shooting during the failed raid and how Marcus had escaped. He ordered a weapons check. "Everyone," he said, "hand in your sidearms." Each officer turned in their firearm. The captain personally inspected them. He checked every magazine. Not a single bullet was missing. That left more questions than answers. After the inspection, Helen approached Peter Doyle. "Why is Captain Grant so focused on catching Marcus Jin?" she asked. Peter didn't respond immediately. Then he pulled her aside and opened a file. "This is why," he said, pointing to a photo. "This man, Daniel Blake, Marcus's closest friend, killed 5 years ago. Marcus changed after that." Helen stared at the photo. It was her father. Peter continued, unaware of the connection. "Your captain's been trying to bring Marcus down for over a decade. He runs the biggest gang in Bayfield. All major drug deals, citywide and beyond, they go through him. But we've never been able to make charges stick," he added. "He's careful. He never leaves a trace." Later that evening, Peter, Helen, and several other officers were seen hanging out at a local bar. A few bottles of beer sat on the table between them. They were relaxed but still talking about the job. "Do you know why the captain's so obsessed with Marcus?" one of the officers asked. Someone replied, "I heard his best friend was killed by him. But no one knows who that friend was," another added. Helen said nothing. She simply stood up after a moment and walked outside, taking her phone with her. She dialed the number again. This time, Marcus answered. "Hello," he said. "It's me," Helen replied. "I'm sorry. I didn't have time to tell you." The mission was sudden. There was a pause on the line. Then she continued, "There are 3 hidden cameras planted in your hotel. You're being watched." Marcus didn't speak for a moment. Well, he finally did. His voice was low. "There's a traitor," he said. At his home, Captain Charles Grant sat in his study, going through old case files. He pulled open a drawer and began unpacking boxes filled with documents. As he sorted through them, he paused. Among the papers was a photograph. It was a picture of Daniel Blake, Helen's father. He stared at it for a moment, then placed it face down on the desk. At the same time, in a private suite at his hotel, Marcus Jin was tearing down surveillance equipment. Small hidden cameras were mounted discreetly in corners and behind vents. He removed them one by one. Across town, police officers monitoring the situation became aware of the dismantling. They reported it directly to Captain Grant. When he heard the news, the captain grew more suspicious. "There's a leak," he said. "Someone on this team is working with him." Elsewhere, Dean Kong was drinking heavily in a nightclub. Surrounded by his men, he slammed down another glass and laughed loudly. "It's time," he said. "5 years I waited for this." That night, Dean and his crew launched an attack on Marcus Jin's old training compound, the one run by Dr. Don James, who had long been trusted with training new recruits. They stormed the site, breaking through the outer gates and moving quickly. Gunshots rang out. Chaos followed. Inside, Thomas Kwan tried to defend the area, but was overpowered. Dean caught him, but instead of killing him, he left him alive, badly injured. Meanwhile, Captain Grant and his team received a phone call. "Head to the compound," the voice on the line said. "Now." They responded immediately, moving fast toward the Don James facility. By the time they arrived, it was too late. Bodies were on the ground. Smoke lingered in the air. Blood had soaked into the gravel. Thomas Kwan, lying on the floor, refused to answer any questions. He was alive, but barely. In the center of the main hall, someone had written a message on the floor in blood. "I'm back later." Peter Doyle gave a report to Captain Grant. "For confirmed dead," he said. "Dozens injured." Elsewhere, Marcus Jin received news of the attack. He slammed his fist against the table in anger. They hit the compound. His assistant, Samuel Kong, stood calmly nearby. "Yes," he said, "but you need to stay out of it. Legally, you're not connected to that place. If you show your face, you risk everything." Marcus didn't respond. At the site of the attack, investigators were still combing the area. Officers found evidence of a new type of drug. They took samples and began checking for any witnesses. But nobody wanted to talk. Even the injured remained silent. Peter turned to Helen. "Whatever happened here wasn't random. And if something like this ever happens again," he stopped, then looked her in the eye. "I'll protect you," he said. The next day, a funeral was held for the victims. A small gathering took place outside the crematorium. Helen came, but wore a full-face helmet to avoid being recognized. On her way out, she ran into Captain Grant and Peter Doyle. They didn't recognize her. But then something unexpected happened. Captain Grant spotted Marcus Jin near the entrance of the funeral home. The two men locked eyes across the room. The air between them felt heavy. Captain Grant approached. "This ends soon," he said. "I'm done watching you walk free." Marcus laughed. "You've been trying for over a decade," he replied. "You're not going to catch me now." The next day, a member of the drug unit named Nathan Drake was working through footage and evidence from the attack at Don James's training compound. After hours of reviewing camera angles and partial facial matches, he found something conclusive. He brought it to Captain Charles Grant. "That's him," Nathan said, "the one who led the attack." The screen displayed a clear image, Dean Kong. Captain Grant studied it carefully. "He used to be one of Don James's men," he said. 4 years ago, he was reported dead during a training incident." The captain leaned back in his chair. "Now we know he's alive. Marcus Jin will definitely make a move." He issued a direct order. "Release Mango. We'll use him as bait." Hearing this, Helen Grant stepped forward. "That's too risky," she said. "You're going to get people killed." Captain Grant didn't respond to her concern. He just walked away. Elsewhere, Marcus Jin received a message on his encrypted phone. It was from Helen. It read, "They're planning to release Mango. It's a trap. Be careful." Marcus read the message in silence. He immediately called off the mission he had been planning. At Bayfield Police Headquarters, Captain Grant and his team waited. Hours passed. Nothing happened. "No movement from Don James's group?" an officer reported. Captain Grant chuckled. "It doesn't matter. Marcus will fall on his own. Someone inside his organization has betrayed him." Later, Marcus received another message from Helen. "There's a traitor. That person plans to meet with Captain Grant." He stared at the screen for a long time. Meanwhile, Thomas Kwan entered his car. As he sat down, he noticed a folded envelope placed on the passenger seat. Inside was a small packet containing the new type of drug and a handwritten letter. The message was simple. "I know where Dean Kong is. Meet me." Without hesitation, Thomas started the engine and drove toward the address listed in the note. At the same time, Helen Grant made her way to a rooftop overlooking the meeting point. She wore a full-face helmet to avoid being recognized. She positioned herself carefully, trying to get a better view of whoever had betrayed Marcus. Her eyes scanned the area. Suddenly, someone approached from behind. It was Peter Doyle. Without warning, he attacked her. They struggled briefly before she broke free and realized something was wrong. "This is a trap," she said. Captain Grant and Peter had set it up from the beginning. Thomas Kwan was being used as bait. The goal was to lure out whoever had been leaking information, and they suspected Helen. Too many classified details had been compromised since she joined the unit. Later that night, injured and in pain, Helen contacted Marcus using her secure line. "Thomas just met with Captain Grant," she told him. "Be careful. Don't make any moves." "Not yet." Marcus didn't respond immediately. She added, "They're trying to force your hand. Don't take the bait." Early the next morning, Helen Grant received new information about the firearm used in her father's murder. According to the internal ballistics report, the weapon was now linked to a name, John Sullivan. She left immediately and headed to Bayfield Police Headquarters. Tucked in her jacket was a knife, one she carried for one reason only. She entered Captain Charles Grant's office and confronted him. "Who is John Sullivan?" she asked firmly. Before he could answer, Peter Doyle walked in, interrupting the moment. Helen took a step back and pulled her hand away from her jacket. She dropped the idea of attacking him, for now. Captain Grant looked at her. "John Sullivan was my best friend," he said. "He died not long after joining our unit." Helen narrowed her eyes. "And who killed him?" Captain Grant replied, "A man named Daniel Blake." Back at the station, Peter approached Helen casually. "You free tonight?" he asked. "We're grabbing drinks." Helen declined. "Not tonight." Peter's friends overheard the exchange from across the room. One of them laughed. "She turned you down, man." "I didn't even ask like that," Peter muttered, trying to ignore them. In truth, Helen had something else to do. She had been tracking the movements of Mango, trying to find out where Dean Kong might appear. But Peter had been suspicious. He followed her. When Helen entered her car, Peter suddenly opened the passenger door and got in. "You're following Mango?" he asked. Helen looked over. "Why are you here?" "You're acting alone." Again, Peter said, "What's really going on?" Helen responded, "They let Mango walk, even though we had proof. It's not right." Without another word, they tailed Mango's vehicle. The trail led them to an old, abandoned factory at the edge of town. Helen and Peter moved in quietly. After a few minutes, Dean Kong arrived. He was there to meet with Mango, but it was a setup. Dean's men surrounded the building and launched an attack. A fight broke out. Helen and Peter were overwhelmed and eventually captured. Elsewhere, Marcus Jin was sitting in a small corner cafe. He looked around and quickly noticed that the people near him weren't just customers. They were watching him. Before they could act, Marcus attacked first. He took out 2 men before leaving the cafe in a hurry. Back in the factory, Dean stood over Helen and Peter, now tied and restrained. He looked at Helen and smirked. "So you're a cop now," he said. "After everything." Helen didn't respond. Dean continued, "You think they're on your side?" Helen stared at him. "Fight me." He laughed again, still stubborn. At the police station, Peter's partner reported that he couldn't be reached. The team began tracking his last known location. Meanwhile, Marcus received a photo on his phone. It was a picture of Helen. She was unconscious. Underneath the image was a message from Dean, "She's next." Without hesitation, Marcus left. At the factory, Dean dragged Helen and Peter into a car parked under a massive hydraulic press. He activated the machinery. The steel plate began lowering slowly toward the vehicle. At the last moment, Marcus arrived. He forced his way inside and managed to pull both of them out just in time. As he helped them up, the sound of police sirens echoed in the distance. Marcus froze. Then he ran. Moments later, Captain Grant and his team arrived. As they assessed the scene, the captain noticed a black car parked nearby. It matched Marcus Jin's vehicle. He was suspicious of Marcus Jin's car that was there. "You went alone," Thomas said. "That was reckless." Marcus didn't hold back in response. "She helped me on the ship," he snapped. "She risked everything, including her cover." Then he added, "What did you do?" "Complain and do nothing." Thomas didn't answer. The next day, Peter confronted Captain Charles Grant in his office. "We need to arrest Dean Kong," he said. Captain Grant leaned back in his chair. "He's not going anywhere. We can get him whenever we want." Peter narrowed his eyes. "You're focusing on the wrong person." Grant didn't hesitate. "No, the problem is Helen." Peter stepped closer. "She's not the traitor." Grant stayed silent. Later, Peter visited the medical wing where Helen was recovering. She was still unconscious. Machines beeped quietly around her bed. Peter stood there, staring at her. "She stayed," he said to himself. "She didn't run." He didn't understand how someone willing to fight beside him could be suspected of betrayal. Peter and his unit moved quickly. They began tracking Dean Kang's network, questioning informants, and chasing down leads. At the same time, members of Don James's former crew were also searching for Dean. During a late-night stakeout, Peter's team apprehended one of Dean's men. After a brief interrogation, the man gave them a location, an abandoned warehouse where other members might be hiding. Don James's gang, working in parallel, continued searching, but they had no success. Thomas Kwan later reported back to Marcus. "We still haven't found him." Marcus looked at him carefully. "You're close to him," Marcus said. "If anyone could be hiding him, it's you." Thomas was stunned. "You think I betray you?" Marcus didn't answer. That same night, Helen remained unconscious. In her sleep, she had a disturbing dream. She saw her father, Daniel Blake, walking ahead of her in a foggy street. No matter how many times she called out to him, he didn't turn around. She started to run. "Dad!" He kept walking. "Please look at me." She screamed, but her voice was silent. Then she woke up, gasping. Peter was sitting beside her. He leaned forward. "You're okay," he said. "You're safe." Helen blinked slowly, her breathing unsteady. Peter sat back. "You want to know why I became a cop?" She nodded weakly. He began, "My younger brother, it was his graduation. We were celebrating at a club." Peter paused. Someone spiked his drink. Just one dose. His heart wasn't strong enough. He died that night. Helen looked at him quietly. "I never found out who did it," he said, "but I swore I'd bring down every drug lord I could." After her recovery, Helen Grant was invited by Peter Doyle to join the other officers for a small gathering. Though she had always been reserved around her colleagues, this time she seemed different. Her walls had started to come down. She laughed a little more, engaged in conversation, and for the first time blended in naturally. The room felt lighter with her presence. But outside their view, Thomas Kwan stood watching from a distance. Hidden behind a tinted vehicle, he observed Helen with narrowed eyes, noting the shift in her demeanor. Later that night, he reported the change directly to Marcus Jin. Concerned by how much Helen had integrated into the unit, Marcus made a decision. He began preparing her emergency exit from the country to protect her undercover identity before it could be exposed. Meanwhile, back at Bayfield Police Station, Captain Charles Grant was focused on another lead. He had ordered a detailed inspection of the crushed car from the warehouse incident. Something about the damage didn't add up. It raised new suspicions. Acting swiftly, Captain Grant instructed his technician to begin tracing every call made and received from Helen Grant's line. At the same time, Marcus reached out to Helen using their secret contact line. He told her to pack a bag immediately. Her flight arrangements were in place. He planned to move her overseas before anything went wrong. But Helen refused. She insisted on staying. She was too close to the truth, and she wasn't going to abandon her mission now. The following morning, she returned to work. She rejoined the team just as they were processing several suspects connected to Dean Kang's gang. Everyone was hopeful. Peter Doyle, in particular, seemed elated. He believed they were closer than ever to capturing Dean. Suddenly, a man named Joseph Shin, who is a police detective, greets Helen. He is the one who chased her father 5 years ago. Seeing their closeness, Captain Grant guessed that the two of them already knew each other. Joseph replied he knew Helen when he was an agent for serious crimes. He knows who Helen is, trying to cover up the facts, and gives her a business card to invite her to eat out. After that, Captain Grant asked Joseph to have a chat together. He asks if he managed to find Daniel Blake's daughter, and he tells him that Daniel's gun, which had disappeared, has suddenly reappeared. Surprisingly, Joseph admits that he doesn't know Daniel's daughter. He says he wants to go home and is then approached by Helen. She asks why he pretends not to recognize her. Hearing that, he smiles and says, "Captain Grant is your father's killer." Then he leaves from there. From a distance, Captain Grant observes the two of them. It turns out that Joseph went to meet Marcus Jin at the dock. He is Marcus Jin's informant in the police force. He finds out that Marcus Jin has smuggled Helen into the police force. He threatens to reveal Helen's disguise if Marcus Jin doesn't want to give him more drugs. That evening, Helen Grant sought out Mango in secret. She confronted him with quiet fury, accusing him of leaking her identity to Dean Kong. Mango tried to feign ignorance, but Helen gave him two choices. Either he could be arrested and charged with attempted murder, or he could confess to Marcus Jin that he had been working under Dean and was responsible for attacking the Jin organization. Faced with no good options, Mango finally relented and gave Helen a location tied to Dean's current whereabouts. Trusting the tip, she immediately passed the information on to Marcus. But what she didn't realize was that Mango had also alerted Dean. Seeing an opportunity, Dean then contacted Captain Grant directly, knowing full well that the captain had been waiting for a lead on Marcus. He made him an offer. He'd reveal Marcus Jin's location if Grant agreed to let him walk free. Meanwhile, Marcus was preparing to go to the meeting point that Helen had sent. Thomas Kwan, however, voiced concern. He suspected a trap, especially given that the intel had come from Helen, someone he still didn't trust fully. But Marcus ignored the warning. His trust in Helen was unwavering. Before leaving, he instructed Thomas to stay behind and take control of the organization in case he didn't return. The day of the confrontation arrived. At the agreed location, Dean was already waiting. He tried calling Captain Grant again, but the line went unanswered. Grant and his team were already hidden nearby, lying in wait. Their objective was to arrest not just Dean, but Marcus as well. Soon after, Marcus and his men arrived at the scene. Without hesitation, a violent clash erupted between the two powerful gangs. Chaos broke out as both sides fought savagely to assert dominance. As members fell on both sides, Captain Grant gave the signal. His officers stormed in, aiming to capture Dean and Marcus amid the confusion. In the midst of the melee, Marcus and Dean came face to face. What followed was a brutal, personal fight. Each man fought with the intention to kill. Helen saw them struggling and instinctively raised her weapon, intending to shoot Dean to protect Marcus. But when Dean finally fell, she hesitated, unsure of her next move. It proved to be a mistake. Dean reached into his shoe and pulled out a hidden penknife. Before Marcus could react, Dean stabbed him repeatedly with sharp, unrelenting strikes. Reacting quickly, Helen raised her weapon again and pointed it at Dean. She shouted for Marcus to escape. But Dean, despite his injuries, only laughed. His taunting left her rattled and unsure of what he meant by it. Just then, Peter Doyle appeared at the scene. He saw the gun in Helen's hand, aimed at Dean. He urged her to lower the weapon. With officers nearby, Dean took the moment to expose everything he knew. But before he could say more, Helen shot him, ending the threat for good. Meanwhile, Marcus, bleeding and barely conscious, fled through the surrounding chaos. But as he reached an alleyway, he was intercepted by Captain Grant, ready to apprehend him. Before the arrest could happen, Thomas Kwan arrived in a speeding car. He slammed on the brakes, shouted for Marcus to get in, and helped him escape into the night. They drove through the city and eventually entered a tunnel. There, Marcus turned to Thomas and handed over temporary control of the organization. He needed time to disappear and heal. After traveling some distance on foot, Marcus arrived at a quiet, secluded temple. A monk there took him in, offering sanctuary and medical care for his wounds. The following day, Helen struggled to come to terms with what she had done. The weight of taking a life for the first time clung to her, and the image of Dean Kong haunted her constantly. That night, Peter Doyle showed up at her apartment unannounced. He brought food, knowing she was likely too shaken to take care of herself. He didn't mention the incident at all. Instead, he spoke gently, reminding her that she shouldn't be alone when the first snow falls. It would be bitterly cold. It was his way of offering comfort without reopening any wounds. But Helen, fearing her cover might slip, decided to fabricate a story. She told Peter that years ago, Dean had tried to assault her and force drugs on her. To support her claim, she showed the faint scars on her hands. That experience, she said, was what pushed her to become a police officer. Peter listened in silence, visibly moved. He believed her without hesitation, his sympathy sincere and unguarded. Elsewhere, Marcus Jin remained in hiding at the monastery. There, he finally recognized the monk caring for him. It was an old friend who had long ago turned away from violence and embraced a Buddhist life. The monk encouraged Marcus to stay and rest a few more days until his body was fully healed. Back in the city, Captain Grant had launched a full-scale manhunt. He called his entire team into action, instructing them to search every possible location within the perimeter where Marcus might be hiding. That same day, Helen received an unexpected envelope addressed to Joanna Blake. Curious, she opened it and froze. Inside was a photo of her father, dressed in full police uniform, the nameplate reading Jonathan Reese. The memory of Dean Kang's words echoed in her mind. How he had mocked her, called her foolish. The truth was beginning to surface, and it was devastating. The letter had indeed been left behind by Dean before his death. Then, a voice message arrived. It was from Marcus. He wanted to meet. Helen went to the monastery, where Marcus was still recovering. When she found him, she confronted him with a photo. She asked if her father had really been a policeman. Marcus looked at the photo and confirmed it. Her father had been sent by Captain Grant, he said, as an undercover officer. But somewhere along the way, he'd chosen to stay. He had left law enforcement behind and joined Marcus's organization. Marcus added that her father had once saved his life, and from that point on, they had grown close. To protect himself, her father had gone by several different names. But what Marcus remembered most was how, from time to time, her father would vanish for a while, only to return smiling, carrying bags full of food. It was then Marcus realized he had a daughter he kept hidden and cherished. From that moment, Marcus felt responsible for the girl his friend had cared so much about. He ended the story with a chilling claim that her father's killer was Captain Grant himself. Marcus had never accepted the betrayal by his own men, but he held Grant responsible for orchestrating it. Now, Helen was more confused than ever. She had already heard another version of the story, one in which Captain Grant, still unaware of her identity, had claimed that Marcus's own subordinate was the one who murdered her father. At a quiet cafe late in the evening, Peter Doyle sat with Captain Grant, who had clearly had too much to drink. The weight of failure hung heavily on them. After all this time, Mujin was still out of reach. Captain Grant seemed to be losing hope, his resolve slowly crumbling. But Peter kept pushing, doing his best to lift his spirits, urging him not to give up. At that same moment, Marcus Jin was on a call with Thomas Kwan. Convinced that Helen Grant would never succeed in completing her mission, Marcus gave a chilling order. Thomas was to kill Captain Grant. Later that night, Peter helped Captain Grant back to his apartment. The older man could barely walk, swaying with every step, but Peter stayed with him until he was safely inside. Once satisfied, Peter left him to rest. Unbeknownst to anyone, a man quietly entered the apartment after Peter had gone. He moved with precision, making his way to where Captain Grant lay and stabbed him repeatedly. A short while later, Helen arrived at the building. She happened to pass the man on the stairs, but didn't give him much thought. Only when she reached the apartment door and noticed the blood smeared across the doorknob did the truth hit her. She pushed the door open and rushed inside. Captain Grant, disoriented and bleeding, reacted in fear. Believing Helen to be Marcus Jin's assassin, he shot her in the arm. But Helen shouted through the pain, saying she had come to confront him about her father. She wanted revenge, not for Marcus's orders, but for what Captain Grant had done years ago. Captain Grant froze, the gun trembling in his hand. Then, with the last of his strength, he handed her an envelope. He told her to leave quickly. Other officers would be arriving soon. Helen, still confused but shaken, took the file and ran. As she reached her car, she opened the envelope. Inside, she found the truth. Her father had been an undercover cop assigned to infiltrate Marcus Jin's organization. His cover had been perfect, so perfect that Marcus considered him a close friend. On Marcus's birthday, her father had even given him a special lighter, one that Marcus always kept with him. Even during beatings, the lighter was in his hand. But hidden inside that lighter was a wiretap. It wasn't long before Marcus discovered scraps of paper in a typewriter. They were drafts of reports, cleverly disguised as fiction stories. That's when he realized the truth. Helen's father had been reporting on him all along. In the same envelope was a sealed letter. Her father had written it in case he died. It was filled with apologies for not being a better father, for not being there as she grew up, for missing out on every important milestone in her life. He had dreamed of seeing her fall in love, of watching her get married, of holding a grandchild one day. But none of that would happen. All he hoped for now was that she would live a peaceful and happy life. The words shattered her. Sitting alone, Helen cried uncontrollably. Her world, built on pain and vengeance, had collapsed under the weight of a letter. Everything she thought she knew had been a lie. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Captain Grant was still alive. He had survived the attack and was undergoing emergency surgery. Later, Helen made a decision. She wanted to have the tattoo on her chest removed. That part of her life, defined by rage and confusion, was over. She now understood where her path truly led and who her real enemy was. She then visited the hospital to check on Captain Grant's condition. Despite everything, she felt genuine remorse for what had happened to him. When she arrived, she ran into Peter Doyle, who was also there. He was convinced that Marcus Jin was behind the attack, and he vowed to catch him soon. As they stood outside the operating room, a doctor and nurse emerged. The news was good. Captain Grant had made it through the surgery. He would live. Elsewhere, Thomas Kwan informed Marcus Jin that Captain Grant had survived the attack. He also revealed that Helen Grant had been present at the scene. Upon hearing this, Marcus gave a direct order. Thomas was to finish the job. It was then revealed that the attacker who stabbed Captain Grant was none other than Thomas himself. After the assault, he tended to his own severely injured hand, trying to stop the bleeding. At the same time, Helen was treating the grazing wound on her arm caused by Captain Grant's earlier gunshot. At the police station, Peter Doyle sat quietly, scanning a series of crime scene photos from the apartment attack. As he examined them, his mind briefly flashed back to the moment Helen had shot Dean Kong. Doubts started creeping in, but the thought of Helen as a suspect kept slipping away just as quickly as it arrived. Meanwhile, Marcus Jin was still recovering at the monastery. His secretary arrived with urgent news. She informed him that he had become involved in Dean Kang's death, whether he intended to or not. She urged him to avoid impulsive decisions. It was then that Marcus discovered a critical fact. Peter had hidden the evidence that proved Helen was the one who killed Dean Kong. Shortly after, as Helen prepared to leave her home, she was ambushed. A group of men sent by Thomas attempted to kill her. However, she managed to fight them off and eliminate every last one. After learning of their failure, Thomas entered the house himself. Before attacking, he revealed his personal motives. He had always wanted to eliminate anyone who betrayed Marcus Jin. But Marcus had never let him handle traitors before. This time, he had taken matters into his own hands. Helen fought back with everything she had. Using Thomas's injured hand to her advantage, she gained the upper hand and overpowered him. As he lay dying, Thomas said they weren't so different, that they were both killers. Hearing this, Helen delivered the final blow and stabbed him to death. Back at the station, the investigation was accelerating. Nade Su received a phone call from a doctor who used to treat patients at Chan Huang Temple. Without hesitation, officers prepared to raid the location. But before they could depart, Marcus Jin arrived at the station and surrendered voluntarily. During interrogation, Peter Doyle confronted Marcus with evidence. He stated that Marcus's fingerprints had been found on the knife used to stab Dean Kong. This made Marcus the prime suspect in both Dean's death and the attempted murder of Captain Grant. But Marcus remained unfazed. He responded confidently, declaring that he would soon walk free. When Helen heard about the interrogation, she immediately rushed to the station. Entering the room, she stood across from Marcus and told him that all the evidence would be used to put him in prison. Her voice was steady, but the fury behind it was clear. She warned him, "This time, he wouldn't escape. While that was happening, Nade Sue reviewed the CCTV footage from outside Captain Grant's apartment. One of the vehicles leaving the area caught his attention. They quickly traced the license plate, and it was registered under Helen's name. At the same moment, another officer handed Peter a folder. Inside was a detailed call log between Captain Grant and Helen. Grant had prepared this file in advance and instructed that it be delivered to Peter only if something happened to him. The contents revealed that Helen had requested evidence related to Dean Kang's attack. She had claimed it was part of the investigation, but she also personally took the knife that Marcus used. When Helen later met with Marcus, she informed him that the knife had been secured as evidence. But Dae Sue and the team had now confirmed that the car leaving Captain Grant's place belonged to her. He brought this information to Peter, along with the matching CCTV visuals. After seeing the footage, Peter was forced to make a decision. He officially issued an order to arrest Helen. However, by that time, she had already disappeared, taking the knife with her. Back at the station, Marcus Jin and his secretary were released. With no hard evidence left to hold him, Peter could no longer justify keeping him in custody. It became clear that Marcus had orchestrated this from the beginning. He had been testing Helen, trying to confirm whether her loyalty to him still remained. Back at the police station, a wave of panic spread through the teams. Officers scrambled to search through Helen Grant's desk, trying to make sense of her actions. None of them had ever suspected that she could have been involved in the assault on Captain Charles Grant. Nade Sue, visibly shaken and furious, turned his anger toward Peter Doyle. He blamed Peter for trusting Helen too much. But Peter remained silent, haunted by the memory of all the things Helen had told him, stories that now seemed suspicious in hindsight. After piecing everything together, Peter's expression changed. He was no longer in denial. He felt betrayed, and that betrayal quickly turned to rage, this time directed at Marcus Jin. He believed Marcus had manipulated Helen from the very beginning. Elsewhere, Marcus had returned to his headquarters. Upon arrival, his secretary informed him that Thomas Kwan and his men had been killed by Helen. Hearing this, Marcus fell into silence. He finally understood that Helen hadn't broken him out of the station out of loyalty. She hadn't helped him because she believed in him. She had done it because she wanted to finish him off personally. Realizing this, Marcus ordered all his men to stand down. No one was to look for Helen. He was certain that she would come to him soon, on her own terms. At the same time, Peter Doyle was seen inspecting the condition of Captain Grant's apartment. While checking the rooms, he stumbled upon a funeral receipt, one that confirmed arrangements for Helen's parents. When he checked the address on the document, his phone rang. One of his colleagues told him to head to Helen's house immediately. Peter rushed to the location. When he arrived, the house was in complete disarray. The interior had been torn apart. There were splatters of blood on the walls and furniture, signs of a violent struggle. Peter walked through the wreckage and opened the cupboard. It was empty. The photo album containing pictures of Helen's father was gone. Without hesitation, Peter drove to the cemetery. Meanwhile, Helen had arrived at her mother's funeral. Quiet and alone, she laid down her father's ashes alongside her mother's. Before she left, she stood silently at the burial site and made a vow to end everything, to get revenge. As she walked away from the cemetery, she didn't expect to see Peter waiting nearby. Their eyes met, and without hesitation, he followed her. Peter caught up to her and pleaded with her to turn herself in. He told her he was deeply disappointed, not just because she had lied, but because he had truly believed in her. Eventually, Peter managed to handcuff her. He led her back to the station. When they arrived, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone in the unit stared at her in disbelief. The disappointment on their faces was clear. Nade Sue, in particular, looked heartbroken. They had all treated Helen like family, like a younger sister, and now she had betrayed that trust. Back at Marcus Jin's headquarters, word reached him that Helen had been taken into custody. But instead of feeling relieved or victorious, Marcus gave an unexpected order. He told his secretary to arrange for Helen's release. It became clear he didn't want her imprisoned. He wanted to face her himself. Marcus Jin was determined to kill Helen with his own hands. At the police station, Peter Doyle stood silently in front of the holding cell where Helen Grant was being kept. He couldn't shake the suspicion that she might have stabbed Captain Charles Grant, possibly out of fear that her true identity would be exposed. Helen remained silent for a while, then finally rose from the bench and looked at Peter. She calmly stated that she didn't stab Captain Grant, although she admitted she wasn't sure he would believe her. The following day, Marcus Jin's secretary, Evelyn Kong, arrived at the station to deliver a message to Helen. Marcus had requested to meet her as soon as she was released. Evelyn then approached Peter and asked him to escort Helen to the hospital for medical treatment. At first, Peter refused, unwilling to go along with the arrangement. But Evelyn quickly warned him that if he didn't cooperate, she would go public with information, specifically that someone from Dong Jun's gang had infiltrated the police force. Realizing the potential consequences, Peter reluctantly agreed to take Helen to the hospital. Elsewhere, Marcus Jin had already issued instructions for his men to prepare to pick Helen up once she arrived at the hospital. When they arrived, Helen was quickly taken into a treatment room. A doctor and a nurse assisted her. Unbeknownst to Helen at first, the nurse was the same woman she had once saved from an overdose at a nightclub. Outside the room, Peter received a phone call. The news was urgent. Captain Grant had just regained consciousness. Peter rushed to the hospital room and immediately told Captain Grant that Helen was suspected of being the person who attacked him. But Captain Grant, now awake and able to speak, gave a different account. He began explaining the story of a man named Jonathan Reese, a member of the Dong Jun organization who had died 5 years earlier. He then revealed that Helen was actually Jonathan's daughter. She had infiltrated Dong Jun's network to discover who had killed her father. Peter, now finally learning the truth, understood that Helen was not behind the attack on Captain Grant. Before Peter left the room, Captain Grant looked at him with determination and gave him a clear order: help Helen. Meanwhile, back in the treatment room, Helen had already removed her own handcuffs. The nurse discreetly handed her a set of car keys and told her to exit through the side door. As she made her way out, several attackers ambushed her outside the hospital building. But Helen managed to overpower them and escape to the parking lot. Just as she reached the car, Peter appeared and tried to stop her from leaving. He told her that he knew the truth now, that he understood everything. He urged her not to go, warning her again that revenge would only destroy her. But Helen refused to back down. She insisted on seeing everything through to the end. During the confrontation, Peter suddenly placed handcuffs on her wrists. The tension escalated as they argued in the parking lot. Their argument was interrupted when Marcus Jin's men appeared and surrounded them, ready to attack. Without wasting a moment, Peter unlocked the handcuffs, and the two of them jumped into the car. They sped off, managing to escape from Marcus's men. The next day, Marcus was preparing for Thomas Kwan's death ceremony. During the preparations, one of his men informed him that Helen had escaped once again. The news was unexpected and clearly upset him. Meanwhile, Peter had taken Helen to a secluded house by the beach. Once they were inside, he helped her tend to her injuries. As he gently cleaned her wounds, he spoke quietly, warning her that holding onto a grudge for too long could destroy a person from the inside. His words hit something deep within Helen. She finally let her guard down and broke into tears, expressing all the emotion she had kept buried for so long. Peter stayed beside her and assured her that she didn't have to face everything alone, that he would help her until the very end. Elsewhere, Marcus was alone in his office. His thoughts wandered to the past as he stared at the old typewriter once used by Jonathan Reese. Sitting on the table beside it was a pistol, the same one Jonathan had selected years ago. Lost in thought, Marcus imagined the moment when Jonathan had been shot at the door of his daughter's apartment. He was interrupted when Evelyn Kong entered his office. She informed him that an arrest warrant had officially been issued for him. She also suggested that he should flee the country to avoid being captured. But Marcus didn't respond with fear. Instead, he picked up a framed photo of himself with Jonathan Reese and threw it to the floor, shattering the glass. Evelyn, sensing the storm of emotions building in him, quietly left the room without another word. Elsewhere, Peter Doyle woke up in a quiet room, only to find that Helen Grant was no longer there. A pang of worry hit him. He assumed she had left without saying goodbye. But a few moments later, as he stepped outside, he saw her standing quietly on the shore. She was facing the ocean, taking in the crisp morning air, her posture calm and steady. Not long after, the two of them got into their car and headed back toward the Incheon police headquarters. The atmosphere between them was light but purposeful. As their car came to a stop at a red light, Helen turned to Peter and softly told him that she had decided to take his advice. Peter responded by promising that he would stay by her side no matter what came next. His tone was steady. He meant every word. But before either of them could say anything else, the sound of a gunshot rang out from the side of their car. In a flash, Peter was hit. The bullet struck him before he had time to react. Helen reached out in shock, her hands trembling as she saw him slumped against the seat, blood already staining his clothes. Struggling to keep herself together, Helen reached for Peter's firearm. Holding it tightly, she turned the wheel and drove toward Marcus Jin's headquarters. She had no more doubts. This had to end. When she arrived, she stepped out of the car and approached the building with determined steps. She raised the gun and ordered the front guard to open the door. A struggle broke out immediately. Helen fought fiercely against Marcus's men, her movements desperate but deliberate. Despite being outnumbered, she managed to overcome them all. Eventually, she reached the inner chamber where Marcus was waiting. He stood before her calmly, and for a moment, time slowed. She raised the gun once again, pointing it directly at him. Her voice was steady as she demanded to know why he had killed her father. Her eyes caught sight of a familiar photograph lying on the ground nearby, an old picture of her father. She knelt briefly, picked it up, and tucked it safely into her pocket. Marcus looked at her, his expression unreadable. He told her that he genuinely admired her, admired the kind of woman she was, one without fear. But Helen wasn't interested in his admiration. Without hesitation, she lunged at him. What followed was a brutal hand-to-hand fight. Marcus was stronger than she expected. His experience and sheer physical power quickly overwhelmed her, and within minutes, she found herself beaten and collapsed to the floor. He approached her slowly, injured but still standing, intending to finish what he had started. But Helen wasn't done yet. With one final burst of strength, she pulled out a hidden knife and drove it into his body. The blow landed hard, and Marcus staggered back, fatally wounded. Helen stood over him, gasping for breath, her face streaked with blood and sweat. She had finally avenged both her father and Peter. Afterwards, Helen left the building alone. In the final scenes, she made her way to her parents' burial site. She knelt by their graves and placed a photo of herself and her father gently on the headstone. Her expression was quiet, exhausted, but at peace. Then, she traveled to another cemetery. Standing before a fresh grave marked with Peter Doyle's name, she remained silent for a long time, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down around her. She had kept her promise, and now it is over.